Okay. Oh, hello again, people. Hey, I thought maybe I'm not sure on how long this is going to take. Hopefully, it's just going to be kind of a short little video. Um, I never did explain to you about Grandpa. I kind of explained to you about how I came to be there. But over my life, I've told my stories to a lot of people. My kids wanted to listen to them at night, you know. So instead of telling ghost stories and campfire stories, I told them about my past. Anyways, one of my really good friends, she's still a good friend to this day. She was taking psychology courses in class, in college, and but she changed her profession later on, and she became a dentist. But anyways, she used to come down the house, and we'd kill a bottle of rum, and just tell stories. So I told her a lot of stories. And now, granted, it's probably, it's probably been 20 years since I saw her. But it's, we were, we were friends for, I don't know, probably, 20, 25 years, you know. Anyways, one of our sit down sessions, she brought up a really important point to me, that I never even considered. And that is, Grandpa probably bought me from my parents. That's why they left me there. I never gave that any thought. But that's kind of was a thing back then. Too many mouths to feed, not enough income, they'd sell off a child. Anyways, I'm grateful. I am. Don't get me wrong. I'm really grateful, Grandpa. If he did, I thank him. Because after hearing what my siblings went through, I had much, much better life than they ever thought of having. So anyways, let me get on with the story about Grandpa. Okay. Now, I got in a lot of fights because of Grandpa. Um, uh, a lot of things he did, being a kid, not understanding. It took quite a few years before I finally understood what he was talking about. But if he heard of a family in need and we had the slaughterhouse, we'd go down and load up half a beef and we'd take it to them and just give it to them. Somebody's car was broke down, they couldn't get to work because they couldn't afford to have it fixed. We'd go tow it to the shop, fix it ourselves. And this is what Grandpa always would do, right? And we were always, we're always helping out in the community. But the problem was, and this is where the fighting came in, is I would be someplace and I'd hear these very same people that we fixed their car for or dropped the half a beef so their kids wouldn't go hungry. Same people bad mouthing Grandpa. Couldn't believe it. I mean, standing in line at the store and somebody starts bad mouthing them. And I didn't hesitate. I just turned around, smacked him right in the nose, stood back. What are you going to do about it? You're sitting here, a man helped you out, and you're just going to badmouth them. And sometimes they fought back, but generally they were too embarrassed, because when you're in the middle of a store and the store is full of all your neighbors and so-called friends and whatnot, and you get called out for badmouthing somebody who just helped you out, you know, they kind of slid off into a corner. And So it was kind of like that. But, you know, at the time, I even asked Grandpa, I said, I said, those people, we give we give this food to or help fix their car. He goes, I've heard them in stores just bad mouthing you. And he goes, well, that's between them and God. That's what he used to tell me. And, like I said, it took me a lot of years to realize that. But Grandpa had a generous side, like I explained to you. He'd help people out, and whatnot. And he'd give people jobs if there was a job available, if and he would train them, and pay them good, and some of them stuck around, some of them didn't, you know. I never understood why we went through the amount of people that we did, but I didn't care because, hell, that was what I did. I filled in. When somebody had quit, get sick, whatever, I'd take their place, whether it was at the dairy, the slaughterhouse, the gas station, the wrecking yard, the garbage route, which is pretty much just me and Grandpa, but once in a while he had somebody go along with him, and things like that, and like, um, he paid me $10 an hour in cash every week. How many hours you work, I'd tell him. Count it right there out on the kitchen table. And like I've said in other videos, there was nothing to spend money on. You know, I got my gas for free for my cars. Didn't have to have auto insurance because it wasn't required back then. And I did all the work on my cars and Grandpa's cars and Chanel and Georgine's, although she was better at her motorcycle than I was. But I learned a lot of things about it from her. And, but Grandpa would go out of his way to help people. And we worked a lot, me and him together. Sometimes he'd just, if he was at the end of the day or everything was all kosher, wherever I was working, he'd show up and he'd just kick back and, we'd bullshit, talk. And he told me how he came about to own all these properties, like when he got out of the Second World War, um, he didn't spend his money in the military. When he was in the military, he said, "Hey, they provided everything. I didn't. There's nothing I needed, and most places it was blown up so bad that there was nothing to buy." So, and I understood that. So when he got home and he applied for a GI loan, um, there was a lot of places in the area going under. So he'd go in, he'd make an offer, on them. And like when he bought the gas station, um, the guy that had bought it and couldn't make a go of it, um, Grandpa hired him, you know, help me with the gas station. I'll put you on a salary. You can stay here and work. Stuff like that. Like with the dairy, when that came up, that was kind of, he said that was a really hard decision to make. He knew nothing about animals, cows, you know. Um, and here it was on the auction block. Nobody was bidding on it. So he bid on it and he got the dairy and all the cows. Well, like I said, he didn't know nothing about it. So he had to find a herdsman. And we did. Um, and I can't remember. I think his name was Vern. Um, he worked for Grant for about 3 years. And he taught us pretty much, what we needed to know to run a dairy. And, like I said, I didn't like school. I liked work. So he'd say something about a cow and I'd ask him to explain it, he goes, look at her hips. Yeah. Okay. Well, she's going to have trouble during birth. Okay. So what do we do? Not breed her? Oh, no, no, no. You breed her, but you breed that trait out of her. You look for a bull that throws a trait that does that, that corrects that problem. So you may not get it this generation, but next generation, you're going to have a good cow. And he'd explain about udders, um, and temperament. And we had this cow there, and she never had a problem calving. She gave lots of milk, but she was crazy. And I swear to God, that cow levitated. She could have all 4 feet in the air swinging and trying to kick you and not touch the ground. And I found out later on, sure by accident, um, I had a package of Ritz crackers I was eating in the milking booth, uh, learning how to milk, and she kept trying to get my crackers. Well, she was next in line, so I gave her a couple of Ritz crackers and put the milk cups on her. Gave her some crackers while she was being milked, and she was a good girl. And so, as long as you gave her Ritz crackers when she came through, you could milk her. If you didn't give her Ritz crackers, wow, she was a cyclone. And that was kind of a purity accident, stumble upon thing. Um, we didn't always have food down in the pit. It was kind of frowned upon, but that particular day, I think I was working a double. I think I opened the gas station that morning and then got called for the afternoon shift because somebody didn't show up. So I had to go fill in for them. And anyways, and I was hungry. I didn't have a chance to eat at the gas station. So I was grubbing on some Ritz crackers and milking the cows. We had this, when she gave birth, uh, the first birth I was there for, I should say. Um, uh, she gave birth to a little bull. Um, he was just he was just adorable. What can I say? I mean, it was just. So I'd go out there and I'd give her some Ritz crackers, and I pretty much raised the bull. And when he was old enough to be taken away, there wasn't enough Ritz crackers for that one. But we tried, and we finally got him away from her. And every day I made it a point to go see him. And we'd do something, I'd just put a halter on him and walk him around out there, in the field. We'd go down in the field to bring the cows in, to be milked. And he'd tag right along with me. Pretty soon I didn't need a leash. I'd just go out there and put a halter on him, and he'd just come right along with me and act like an idiot, baby cow. What do you expect, tearing across the field, kicking his heels up in the air, just being a goofball, man. That's kind of crazy. But anyways, he grew up and he got to be a big boy. I think he tipped the scales at about 1,800 pounds, somewhere from there. Um, and that was a sad day when we had to put him down. Uh, there, you got inspectors, they come through and they make sure all the cattle are tagged, all the, everything's kosher. The stalls are clean, the test of food, and check your veterinarian records and make sure all the animals are being taken care of. And, yeah. Anyways, he always yelled at him, at T-Bone. And he always told him, he goes, "You'd look good between 2 sesame seed buns." And he must have known what that meant because he did not like that guy. And so, we made it a point to try to keep him away, when the inspector was there. But he slipped in one day thinking he was going to catch us doing something. I don't know what his brain cell was, but he screwed up. and old T-Bone got him, and it was bad. I mean, he broke probably 25% of bones in his body. All we heard was yelling and screaming. We ran out there, and old T-Bone had him pressed up against the metal gate, just slamming him with his head. And when we finally got him off him and away from him and got the ambulance there and they hauled his ass off, well, even though nobody had a problem with him ever, I mean, hell, he was like a big lap dog. I'd go out there and sit in the sun, read a book, lay on top of him, He was just a little big, puppy dog is all he was. But I teased him, and like I said, I think he knew what he was talking. And, T-Bone knew what he was talking about because he put that man in a wheelchair for the rest of his life. But to keep from getting our life sued within an inch of us, we had to put T-Bone down. That broke my heart. It did. I couldn't be there for that. I didn't want his last sight to be his friend standing there while they killed him. And so I had to take some time off from the dairy for that, and it hurt quite a bit. But anyways, back to Grandpa. And so then when he bought the gas station, he bought the tow truck came with it. The tow the cars in to get fixed, and then the wrecking yard just kind of happened. There was a bunch of land that Grandpa wanted because he wanted to grow the corn and the barley and as much stuff as we can on it. And it was a pretty good chunk of land. It was, I don't know, probably 200 acres. Anyways, the guy that we bought the property from already had the makings of a wrecking yard on there. He had a bunch of kids and relatives in the area, and anybody that would crash their car and didn't, they'd just leave it alongside the road, and that, so he'd go get him, and they'd come in eventually, and he'd get them to sign over the title to the car. So everything was up and up. So when I think he passed away, the old man, and they wanted to sell out. So Grandpa bought it, and that's kind of how the wrecking yard started. This is way before my time. Okay, I mean, I wasn't there. This is just what Grandpa told me, but the garbage route was his idea. He bought a truck and started that, and that he was a deputy sheriff, and it didn't really mean a lot back then because he didn't get paid because it was that they didn't pay deputies back then. You were a sheriff or you were a volunteer deputy, as I think is what they called them. And that whenever the sheriff needed a hand, he'd call a few deputies and they'd go handle whatever was, mostly it was recoveries. Somebody had crashed their car, and we had some pretty good bluffs around there. Sometimes it was quite a ways to the river, 300 or 400 feet, or to the valley, or the mud slides or the rock slides, and they'd have to go in and do a recovery. So, and he needed the local sheriff. He'd need a hand when it comes to that. So, anyways, so that's how Grandpa got to become. Oh, by the way, this is Ladybug. What a time. started coming around. Grandpa was, like I said, he was getting up in years. He wasn't old, I think he was around 45 or so, between 40 and 50 when I come around. And like I said, um, he never had any kids, boys. So I took the place, and which was a good thing. I mean, I had some really good times. I got to learn. Well, I'm still using what I learned from him to this day. Um, uh, I don't work on new cars. I work on, I think 2000 is the cutoff limit. Everything above that's just got too much electronics. It ain't worth the, um, I ain't going to go down and buy a $2,000 scanner to scan somebody's car just to have them take it some other place and have them do the work. So I don't do that. And being over here, for, I don't know, 20 years or so in Hawaii, you learn, um, you trust your instincts. Anyways, so when I come along, uh, I hung out with Grandpa daily for probably the first 2 years. Um, him teaching me all the ins and outs of what was needed and where, and how things elevated in certain areas. How we had to keep up with stuff. You know, the slaughterhouse and the dairy were two biggies. Because they were always under scrutiny for cleanliness, which is understandable. But Grandpa had a quirk. If he caught you doing something wrong, and when I mean wrong, I mean something that, was morally wrong, he'd shoot him in the foot. He carried a little 22 Derringer, and he'd shoot him in the foot. And then he'd arrest him, take him to the hospital, get him patched up, take him to jail, let him sit in jail for a while. And they'd tell him, keep your mouth shut, you get out. You want to talk, go see the judge? Go see the judge. They're going to believe you over me. I kind of doubt it. And 99% of the time it worked. They'd walk away, and I asked Grandpa why he did that. And he said, well, because you can always tell the bad folks. He goes, those are the ones that are walking around with a limp. He goes, those are the ones you need to keep your eyes on. And I kind of thought that was funny. Okay, Grandpa, but I mean, and it was kind of weird. Like I said, him and Grandma didn't sleep in the same room. And Grandma was a really mean person. I don't know why. That's all before my time. But you got Janelle and Georgine. Georgine, you could see the grandpa in her, and you could see grandma in her. Janelle, you couldn't tell. There was no, you couldn't tell grandma in her or grandpa. So my opinion on that is grandma probably fooled around, got pregnant, and back then divorce wasn't something you did, and so they kind of made it work. But grandma I think she hated the fact that he um he forgave her, but he wouldn't touch her, type thing. And but the postmistress that um everybody got their mail from, uh she was quite the dish. She really was. This is back when food was good, right? It ain't like we got these, like nowadays, the people that eat at McDonald's constantly, are 200 pounds overweight, diabetes, all kind of medical problems. That was not happening. That was not something you saw every day. You know, um, a heavy person was maybe 20 pounds overweight, unless you were a guy, and that was a beer belly. But most of the women were slim and trim, and they took care of themselves. They had pride, and the men did too. But they drank too much beer, and they get the beer belly. You know, um, and we, people seem to stay together. A husband and wife. They it meant something. It meant being happy with your spouse. Anyways, so I never knew what happened between them, but I thought, Janelle don't look nothing like Grandpa and don't look nothing like Grandma, so where the hell does she come in? And Grandma always doted over Janelle. I mean, Janelle could do no wrong. I couldn't do any right. Georgine, she kept Grandma in check. I mean, she was, like I said, Georgine, she drove a Harley Davidson motorcycle, for Christ's sakes. That wasn't a time when women were driving Harley Davidson motorcycles. Yeah, you had to be tough, broad, for that, because those things hurt. I mean, I rode on the back of that thing with Georgine a lot, and I could see where back in the day, those early motorcycles, boy, they were spine crushers. And but she had a good heart. Georgine did. She really did. Um, Janelle, she didn't like me until I started working on her car, and then I was useful. If she needed something done, kind of sneaky, then she'd talk me into it, and which most of the time wasn't that hard because entertainment, at least, like the time they took a larger propane bottle and we floated it across the river and we set it up in the rocks because we were having a big beach party down at the place, somebody's birthday. And so the scheme of the plan was, well, we'll shoot it and it'll explode. Right. Well, we tried it and we shot one and it didn't explode. So new change of plans. So that's when the what, you're beautiful. The flare gun came into play. Her boyfriend shot the propane tank. I fired the flare gun, and that thing seemed like it blew the mountain apart. I mean, we're lucky somebody didn't get killed over that. From all the rocks that we had stacked around it, and all the metal flew in the air. I mean, it rained rocks for a good, gosh, it seemed like 5 minutes, And like I said, we're lucky nobody got killed during that episode. But that's the kind of thing, mindset that Janelle had, like for Halloween one time she dressed up her boyfriend in a baby outfit and took an M80, they're firecrackers, and wrapped the thing in clay and wrapped paper around it and wrote dynamite on it. And we're down at the bar having a big Halloween bash, and he's running around with the dynamite and a lighter. Hey, act like a baby, right? Yeah. And towards the end of the thing, um, uh, he lit that fuse. And another thank God moment, he was off by himself. Well, he damn near blew his hand off. When that M80 went off and wrapped in that clay, that tripled it. I mean, that he had His whole face was bruised. His arm was numb for probably 3 months. You know, like I said, he's lucky he didn't blow his damn hand off. It was just all around stupid move. But, you know, hey, you know, nobody else. Luckily he was far enough away when he did it that he was the only one that was infected. Although it did splatter the wall and a few, you know, beer bottles. Maybe some people did get hit, you know, but none of it hurt, uh, or we would have heard about it. Um, you know, this kind of stupid stuff like that. And anyway, so over the years, there'd be times when, uh, you know, Grandpa would disappear. You know, and that's where I got to thinking that maybe him and the postmistress was fooling around, because on days that he disappeared, the post office was closed. And so, anyways, that's just my thoughts. But anyways, um, grateful to you, Grandpa, and I want to say thank you for being there for me and teaching me the values of life. Um, it was a learning curve, and I hope I'm doing you proud, Grandpa. I'm trying to be the best person I can. And I'm going to say goodbye now. And goodbye, Grandpa. And God bless everybody.